The tow truck was already rolling across my lawn, crushing the flower beds my wife had spent hours planting, while two men in cheap black tactical shirts shouted that they were there to seize my truck. They carried a fake removal order, a pair of handcuffs, and an attitude that made it clear they didn't plan to leave without my property. This wasn't about some HOA rule or a misunderstanding. This was a straight-up theft, orchestrated by a corrupt HOA president named Karen Say, who thought she could push a simple rancher out of his father's vintage 1972 red Ford. She looked at my muddy boots and assumed I was just another easy target. She made one big mistake. She didn't know that the old farmer she was threatening was actually a special agent for the FBI, currently on active leave. I wasn't just standing there, watching them break the law. I was waiting, watching, calculating the exact moment to spring a trap that would make them wish they'd never been born. One flash of my badge, and their entire criminal plan would collapse. That red truck would be the last thing they'd ever tried to tow, because that truck wasn't just a truck. It was a rolling time capsule, a collection of steel, sweat, and memory. A 1972 Ford F100, faded red with a dent in the driver's side door, courtesy of a stubborn bull back in '88. The cracked bench seat smelled of old vinyl, summer dust, and my father's cheap cigars. Every time I turned the key, the engine coughed to life with a low, satisfying rumble, like the truck was greeting me, saying, "Welcome back, son." It was the sound of my childhood, of Saturday mornings spent handing my father wrenches and learning which words you weren't supposed to say in the house. That truck was all I had left of him. It sat there under the old oak tree, quiet and proud, a monument to a simpler time. My life wasn't simple anymore. Not really. On the surface, I was Trevor Daniels, rancher, cattle herder, man of 100 acres of Texas hill country. I fixed fences, drank my coffee black, and liked the quiet. But my wife Linda was the only one who knew the whole truth. She knew that for 20 years. My tough days weren't broken down tractors, they were broken down doors in safe houses, with bad men on the other side. She knew my calluses came as much from a pistol grip as from a shovel handle, and she knew that in a safe in my office, behind books on cattle breeding, sat my FBI badge and credentials. I was on long-term leave, trying to bury the part of me that saw danger in every shadow. For 2 years, it had worked. The loudest noise on the ranch was the evening cicadas, the biggest threat a coyote sniffing around the chicken coop. Linda and I were building a life, one fence post at a time. That truck was the heart of it. It didn't run perfectly. It didn't shine. But it was honest. It was my antidote to a life spent chasing liars and con men. When I climbed into that cab, I wasn't Special Agent Daniels. I was just Trevor. That truck was my anchor, the link to the quiet life I was trying so damn hard to hold on to. But peace is a rental, not a purchase, as the bureau psychiatrist used to say. Trouble first came in the mail. Not a bill, not a postcard from Linda's sister, but a thick cream-colored envelope with a raised logo on the back. Oak Creek Meadows, Homeowners Association. I didn't even know we were part of an HOA. Our ranch had been here 50 years before some developer built a row of beige houses next door, each one with a perfectly trimmed lawn. I assumed we were grandfathered out of their rules. I slid the envelope open and pulled out a thick sheet of paper. The letterhead tried way too hard to look official, curling at the edges like it had been handled by someone nervous. Linda leaned over my shoulder, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's that?" she asked, voice soft, the kind of curiosity that only comes from a peaceful morning. I began reading aloud. Dear resident, it has come to the attention of the Oak Creek Meadows HOA Architectural Review Committee that a derelict vehicle is being stored on your property in violation of Bylaw 7. Section 4, Paragraph C. I paused, looked at her. Architectural Review Committee. Our house was 100 years old, made of stone. What were they going to review? The dirt. Linda chuckled, warm and genuine, and I kept reading. The vehicle in question, a vintage utility truck of indeterminate color, is considered an eyesore and negatively impacts the aesthetic harmony of our community. I looked out the window at my dad's truck, parked a good 200 yards from the property line, barely visible behind the oak tree. Indeterminate color, sun-baked, original factory red, older than the architect who designed their little subdivision. I tossed the letter on the table. Aesthetic harmony. HOA speak, for we hate anything with character. Linda grinned. Oh, this is rich. Keep going. The letter demanded immediate removal of the vehicle within 14 days. Failure to comply would result in fines, followed by property remediation, which included towing at my expense. Signed with a flourish. Karen Smay, President Oak Creek Meadows, HOA. I folded the letter and set it on the counter. My first instinct was the old one. Start running background checks, assess the enemy. But I pushed that down. I was a rancher now. This was just some busybody with too much time on her hands. Property remediation. I snorted. Fancy words for we're going to steal your truck. Linda picked up the letter, her sharp eyes scanning the page. She wasn't a federal agent, but she had instincts. She saw what most people missed. Look at this wording, Trevor. Community Patrol has been authorized to enforce all bylaws. Security Patrol. For what runaway law? I shrugged, trying to keep it light. Probably a couple of retirees in a golf cart with flashing yellow lights, but a cold, calculating part of my brain was already cataloguing every word. Intimidation designed to feel legal. A power move, plain and simple. For now, I decided to treat it with the respect it deserved. I dropped it in the trash. Well, I said, turning back to Linda with a small smile, I guess we know what Karen Smay does for fun. She laughed, but her eyes were thoughtful. She knew me better than anyone. She knew that while I might ignore the letter, I wouldn't ignore the threat. A week went by. Sun rose, sunset, cows were fed. I didn't give the letter another thought, at least. I tried not to. I figured it was a bluff, a shot in the dark from a bored woman in a beige house. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, a white SUV with Oak Creek Meadows security decals pulled up to the front gate. Cheap vinyl peeling at the edges. Two men got out, dressed in black tactical shirts with HOA security printed in bold white letters across their chests. The big one had a neck like a stack of tires and a shaved head, like life had been trying to intimidate him as much as he tried to intimidate everything else. The smaller one was wiry, jittery, like a squirrel realizing it forgot where it buried its nuts. Linda saw them from the kitchen window. Company's here, she said flatly. Looks like the welcoming committee. I was in the barn, covered in grease from a leaky hydraulic line on the tractor. Wiping my hands on an old rag, I stepped out. This was my land. They were on my time. I stopped 20 feet from the gate, leaving it closed between us. The big guy puffed out his chest. His name tag said something unimportant. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. You, Trevor Daniels. He rumbled. I might be, I said calmly. Who's asking? The wiry one, clipboard shaking, stepped forward. We're with Oak Creek Meadows Security. We're here about the vehicle. He pointed at the old Ford. I leaned on the gatepost, arms crossed, posture relaxed. Let them think they were in charge. Fellas, I appreciate the drive out here, but this property isn't part of your HOA. This ranch has been here since before your development was even a thought in some guy's head. He took a step closer, trying to use his size to intimidate. Classic move, tactic, and a clumsy one. According to our records, your property falls within the community jurisdiction. We have paperwork right here. Zip fumbled with the papers on his clipboard. See, it says the bylaws are enforceable on all adjacent properties to maintain community standards. I didn't even look at the paper. I looked at Hossar's boots, then his belt, then his eyes, assessing threats as muscle memory, and right now I was looking at a wannabe tough guy with a badge bought online. An HOA agreement is a civil contract, I said, my voice dangerously bored. You can't force a signature, and you can't enforce a bylaw on a deed that predates your subdivision by 50 years. You're not cops. You're trespassers with walkie-talkies. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of movement in the upstairs window. Linda with her phone. Smart woman. Joe's face was turning a blotchy red. He wasn't used to people talking back calmly. He was used to puffing out his chest and getting his... Look, pal, we're not here to argue law with you. We're here to give you a final warning. You move the truck or we'm off it for you. You got 48 hours. I just smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made suspects in interrogation rooms start sweating. Let me make sure I understand. You two employees of a private company are threatening to come onto my private property and remove my Is that about right? Zip looked at Hoss, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Hosea just doubled down. It's not a threat. It's a promise. We're authorized. Authorized by who? Karen Smay, I asked. The name seemed to surprise them. The president of your little club gave you the authority to commit grand theft auto. Hosea's jaw tightened. You'd better watch your mouth, old man. I wasn't old, but I let it slide. No, you'd better listen, and listen close. Get in your car, drive away, and don't come back on my land. This is your first and only warning. The next time you show up, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. For a long moment, nobody moved. Hosa stared at me, his brain trying to process a response that wasn't physical. He was a hammer, and I wasn't a nail. He didn't know what to do. Finally, Zip tugged on his sleeve. Come on, Hosea. Let's just report back. He shot me one last glare, then turned and stomped back to the SUV. They get in and drove off, kicking up a cloud of dust. I watched them go, the smile fading from my face. This wasn't just a bored woman anymore. She was sending goons. They were dumb, but they were... I turned and walked back to the house. Linda met me at the door, her phone still in her hand. I got all off that, she said, clear as a bell. You were very polite. I'm a polite guy, I said, but I don't think they've got the message. She looked at me, her expression serious now. So, what's that? I looked out past the barn to where the old Ford stood under the oak tree, solid and silent. The plan, I said, is to be ready for the next time they come, because they will be back, and they won't be bringing a clipboard. 48 hours came and went. I spent the time doing what I always did, mending fences, not just the ones on the property line, but the ones in my head. I walked the perimeter of my land, checking for weaks, not just in the wire, but in my own resolve. I had come here to escape this feeling, this constant state, flow level alert. Now it was back, knocking on my door in a cheap security uniform. On the third day of Thursday, they came back. This time, they weren't alone. Behind their ridiculous white Sauvas, a rusty, grease-stained tow truck. My heart, which I thought had become slow and steady with the rhythm of ranch life, gave a hard, familiar thump against my ribs. It was the old feeling, the pre-operation jitters. I had thrown on my old tactical plate carrier over my flannel shirt. Old habits die hard, and I wanted them to see I meant business. I was standing on the porch, drinking a cup of coffee. Linda was right beside me, her phone already up and recording just as we'd planned. She had a small, grim smile on her face. She'd seen me face down much worse than this. But she also knew what this truck meant to me. It wasn't about the metal. It was about the principle. Hosea and Zip got out of the SUV. The tow truck driver, a greasy man in a stained jumpsuit, stayed in his cab, looking bored. Host marched toward the house, a piece of paper held out in front of him like a royal decree. Hess stopped 20 feet away, just beyond the flower beds Linda had so carefully planted. "Daniels," he yelled, his voice straining with forced authority. "We have a removal order. You can either give us the keys or we'll drag it out off here the hard way." I took a slow sip of my coffee. I set the mug down on the porch railing with a deliberate click. I didn't raise my voice. "That's my property. You're not touching it. This order is signed by the HOA president and authorized by our legal department," he shouted, shaking the paper. "It's legally..." "It's a piece of paper with a woman's name on it," I said, my voice as calm as the morning air. "It's about as legally binding as a grocery list. You and your friend are trespassing. The tow truck driver is about to be an accessorito, attempted grand theft. I suggest you all leave." Hosea laughed, a short, ugly... "You think you can stop us? Look at you. You're just some washed-up old..." He turned to the tow truck driver and waved him forward. "Go get it." The tow truck rumbled to life and began to slowly, carefully back across my lawn toward the oak tree, its reverse beeper screaming in the quiet morning. That was it. The line had been crossed. I looked at Linda. She gave me a single sharp nod. I walked down the porch steps and started toward them. I didn't run. I walked with a purpose. Each step, Haw saw me coming and puffed out his chest again, planting his feet. "That's far enough, old man." I walked right up to him until we were inches apart. He was bigger than me, but size is a poor substitute. "I'm going to say this one last time," I said, my voice low and clear. "Tell your driver to stop, get back in your car, and leave my property." "Or what?" he sneered, leaning into my personal space. "You going to throw a pitchfork at me?" I didn't answer with words. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet. It wasn't the worn leather one I used for cash. It was the black one, the official one. I flipped it open. The gold shield inside caught the morning sun, flashing like a beacon. I held it right in front of his face. His eyes, which had been full of smug confidence, went wide. He froze. Their sneer on his face melted away, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. He squinted, reading the words engraved around the seal. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent, United States Department of Justice. The world seemed to go silent. Even the tow truck's beeper seemed to fade away. Hosea's face went from red to a pasty white. He looked from the badge to my face. And for the first time, he wasn't seeing a rancher. He was seeing something else. Something he didn't understand and was suddenly very, very afraid of. Zip, who had been standing a few feet back, saw the look on Hosea's face and crept closer. He peered over his partner's shoulder at badge. His jaw dropped. "Federal agent," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't thave. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a car. I took a step forward, and Hosea took a terrified step back. Interfering with a federal officer, attempted grand theft auto conspiracy. I ticked the crimes off on my fingers. Your boss, Karen Smay, just adjured you to commit a federal felony, and you almost did it. I leaned in close so only he could hear the grit in my voice. Get off my land. The tow truck driver, seeing thick emotion, had stopped. He was leaning out his window trying to figure out what was happening. Hosea and Zip looked like statues. They were completely and utterly frozen, their brains short-circuiting. They had come to bully a farmer, but they had found something else entirely. The hunter had just realized he'd been chasing a lion. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Hosea and Zip stood there paralyzed, their cheap security uniform suddenly looking like Halloween costumes. The tow truck driver had killed his engine, and the sedenquiet made the buzzing of a single hoarsely sound like a chainsaw. I kept the badge steady, letting the reality of the situation sink into their thick skulls. Linda, bless her heart, hadn't missed a beat. She was still recording from the porch, her camera steady as a rock. She even zoomed in on the badge, then panned slowly from Hosea's terrified face to Zip's. This was going to be Exhibit A, finally. Hosa found his voice, or a pathetic, squeaky version of it. This is a fake," he stammered, though there was zero conviction in his words. He was just grasping at straws, trying to rebuild the world that had just been shattered. I slowly closed the wallet with a soft leather sigh and slipped it back into my pocket. "Do you really want to bet your freedom on that?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Because if you're right, all you've done is trespass. If you're wrong, you and your little friend Zip here are looking at federal charges. Conspiracy, impersonating an officer, intimidation of a federal agent. Those come with sentences that have commas in them. Now you have about 5 seconds to get your tow truck off my grass before I make a call that will bring a lot of people with real badges and real guns to this address." Zip was already backing away, his hands held up in a gesture of surrender. "Hosea, man, let's go," whispered, tugging on the big man's sleeve. "Just go now." Hosea was still struggling with it. His entire identity was built on being the tough guy, the enforcer. But the foundation had just been down. He looked at me at the house, at the endless stretch of land behind me. He was finally understanding that. He had picked a fight in a weight class he didn't even know existed. He gave a jerky nod, not looking at me. He and Zip practically ran back to their SUV. Hayes yelled at the tow truck driver. "Get out of here. Go." The driver, who clearly wanted no part of this, cranked his engine and pulled his truck off my lawn, leaving 2 muddies in the grass. He didn't even bother trying to get paid. He just wanted to be gone. The white SUV spun around and sped down my driveway, spitting gravel. I stood there until the dust settled, watching them disappear down the road. The immediate threat was gone, but the problem wasn't solved. This was an escalation. They had pushed, and I had pushed back with the biggest trump card I had. Now the ball was in Karen Smith's court. She was either going to back down completely, or she was going to do something even more stupid. My money was on stupid. I walked back to the house. Linda met me on the steps, lowering her phone. Her eyes were shining with a mixture of excitement and concern. "Well," she said, a slow grin spreading across her face. "I don't think they'll be sending those two clowns back again." "No," I agreed, taking the coffee mug from the railing. It was cold now. "Next time she'll send someone smarter, or she'll try to use the law." "Let her," Linda said, her voice full of confidence. "I've got 47 minutes of high-definition video of her employees committing multiple felonies." "What's our next move, Agent Daniels?" The name felt foreign on my own property. I didn't want to be Agent Daniels here, but Karen Smith had left me no choice. Would make it personal. The next visit wouldn't be in broad daylight, and it wouldn't be about towing my truck. It would be about intimidation, pure and simple. And for that, I would be ready. The ranch had security cameras, of course, but they were the kind you buy at a big box store. It was time for an upgrade. It was time to show them what real surveillance looked like. The night visit came 2 days later, just as I'd expected. It was well past midnight. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, and the world outside our windows was a sea of inky black. Theonly sounds were the chirping of crickets and the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I was awake. I hadn't really slept soundly since the checkpoint incident. The old instincts were fully online now, that part of my brain that listens to the silence and waits for it to break. Linda was asleep beside me. I slipped out of bed, pulled on a pair of jeans, and went to the living room. I sat in my armchair, the one facing the long driveway, and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. At 1:27 a.m., a pair of headlights appeared at the end of the road. They weren't the bright, steady beams of a normal car. They were the high-powered spotlights, Ofon off-road light bar, the kind designed to turn night into day. The vehicle crept slowly up my driveway, the light scutting a blinding swath across the front of my house, sweeping over the windows. It was a classic intimidation tick, meant to scare, to disorient, to make you feel helpless in your own home. They were hunting. They just didn't know the prey was hunting them back. The moment their tires touched my property, they triggered the first of my new toys. A series of low-light motion-activated cameras I had installed along the driveway came to life. They were a militara, silent and invisible in the dark. On the tablet in my lap, I was getting a crystal clearer multi-angle view of their approach. It was the white SUV again. This time, there were 3 of them, Hosa and Zip, and a new face. A tall, lean man who moved with a confidence. The other 2 lacked. He was in charge. They parked about 50 yards from the house, leaving the spotlights on, pinning the front porch in a harsh glare. They got out, carrying long, heavy flashlights. They weren't cops. They were a posse. They started walking toward the house, moving in a loose formation. The new guy was in the lead. "This is private property," I said, my voice booming out of the darkness. They froze, startled. They spun around, shining their flashlights wildly, trying to find the source of the voice. They couldn't see me sitting in the dark living room, but they could hear me perfectly. I had activated the outdoor speaker system I'd wired into the eaves of the porch. You have been photographed and recorded, I continued, my voice calm and even, amplified by the speakers. The sheriff's department has been notified of your license plate and your presence here. You have 10 seconds to get back in your vehicle and leave, for you are arrested for trespassing and stalking. The new guy recovered first. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. We're not scared of some old man on a speakerphone. We're here on official HOA business. There's no such thing as official HOA business at 1:30 in the morning, I replied. This is criminal harassment. He took another step forward. That's when he triggered the second part of my trap. With a press of a button on my tablet, I activated the irrigation system. Not the gentle sprinklers for the lawn, but the high-pressure agricultural sprinklers I used for the pastures. For massive industrial-grade sprinkler heads rose from the ground and erupted with the force of fire hoses. A wall of cold, muddy water slammed into them. They yelled in shock and surprise, stumbling back. The powerful streams knocked the from their hands, plunging them into disorienting darkness, save for the spotlights from their own SUV. They were soaked, blinded, and completely confused. That's the high-pressure liquid fertilizer system. My voice boomed from the speakers, rich in nitrates and raw cow manure. I wouldn't open your mouths if I were you. They scrambled back toward the SUV, slipping and sliding in the mud they had just created. Hosea, in Hispanic, tripped and fell face first into a puddle of mud and nitrate. He scrambled up, spitting sludge. They piled back into the SUV, dripping and furious. The new guy stood by the driver's door, wiping slime from high size, and screamed at the house. You're going to regret this, Daniels. You're finished. The only thing that's finished is your clean driving record, I called back. The sheriff is on his way. That was a bluff, but they didn't know that. The SUV's doors slammed shut, and it tore back down the driveway, fishtailing in the mud. I watched them go, the tension in my shoulders finally easing. I sat there in the dark, watching the footage back on my tablet. It was perfect, clear video of them trespassing, clear audio of their threats, followed by the slapstick comedy of their welders. Linda appeared in the doorway, tying her robe. I heard yelling and then a lot of splashing. I held up the tablet and showed her the video. She watched, a slow smile spreading across her face. When Hosea fell in the mud, she let out a delighted laugh. Oh, Trevor, that's brilliant. Utterly childish, the brilliant. And you got it all on camera. Every glorious muddy second, I confirmed. This isn't just evidence anymore. This is leverage. She came and sat on the arm of my chair, looking out window into the now quiet darkness. They're not going to stop, you know, she said softly. This just made it Pacino for them. I know, I said, my voice grim. That's what I'm counting on. They're going to get sloppy. They're going to make a mistake, and when they do, I'll be there to catch them. The game had changed again. They had tried to intimidate me in my home at night. They had failed spectacularly. Now they were angry, embarrassed, and soaking wet. The next move would be desperate, and desperation leads to mistakes. The physical clash came sooner than I expected. Karen Smith was denazending her B team. The next time she came herself, it was Saturday morning. I was out by the barn working on that same leaky hydraulic line on the tractor. The sun was warm, the air was still, and for a moment it almost felt like a normal day. Linda was in her garden humming to herself. That's when two vehicles came down the driveway. The white security SUV was in the lead, but behind it was a shiny black Escalade that screamed, "Look at me." The SUV parked and Hoss, and the new guy from the other night got out. The Escalade pulled up right behind it, and Karen Smith emerged from the driver's side. She was exactly what I'd pictured, dressed in a crisp white pantsuit that was completely impractical for a ranch with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and sunglasses the size of dinner plates. She moved with an air of absolute authority, like a queen visiting a peasant village. Linda saw them and immediately started walking toward the house, her phone already in her hand. She knew the drill. Karen Smith marched toward me, her heels sinking slightly into the soft dirt. Her two goons flanked her, trying to look imposing. Hosea had a big, ugly bruise on his cheek, probably from his fall in the mood. "Trevor Daniels," she announced, her voice sharp and brittle. She took off her sunglasses to reveal cold, angry eyes. "I am Karen Smith. Your game's over." I slowly put down my wrench and wiped my hands on my rag. I didn't stand up right away. I let her wait. Finally, I rose to my feet and faced her. "Ma'am," I said, my voice polite, "you're on private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I am not going anywhere," she snapped. "My security team is here to perform a full inspection of your property for bylaw violations. We have reason to believe you are running an unregistered commercial operation here." It was a new angle, a desperate attempt to find a new pressure point. "Iron cattle," I said flatly. "This is a ranch. It's been a ranch for 50 years. You're not inspecting anything." She smirked. "That's where you're wrong. The HOA bylaws give us the right to inspect any property within our jurisdiction, tone share, compliance." She gestured to her men. "Gentlemen, begin with the barn." Hosea and the other man started to walk toward the barn entrance. I took one step to my left, blocking their path. I didn't say a word. I just stood there. It was a simple, unmistakable message. "You are not passing." Hosea stopped. He looked at me, then back at his boss. He remembered the badge. He remembered the mud. He was hesitant. The new guy, however, was not. "Move," he said, his voice a low growl. "I'm not going to tell you again." "And I'm not going to tell you again," I replied, my voice just as low, just as calm. "This is my property. You are not welcome here. Leave now." Karen Smee was furious. Her plan was falling apart. "Don't just stand there, you idiots. Remove him." The new guy took that as his cue. He lunged at me, reaching out to grab my shirt and throw me aside. It was a clumsy, telegraphed move. For a man like me, it was happening in slow motion. As Hishand reached for me, I pivoted on my back foot, deflecting his arm with my left hand. I used his own momentum against him, spinning him around. In the same fluid motion, my right hand came up and I applied a simple, painful wrist lock. He yelped in surprise, and pain Assi twisted his arm up behind his back, forcing him down to his knees. It took less than 2 seconds. It was over before even knew it had started. Hosea just stared, his mouth hanging open, hadn't moved a muscle. Karen Smith gasped, her face a mixture of shock and rage. I held the man there, his arm pinned securely. I wasn't hurting him, not really, but he wasn't going anywhere. I leaned down and spoke into. She had brought my old life to my new one. "Our next move," I said, heading inside, "is to stop playing defense. We're going on the attack. You get on the computer. I want to know everything there is to know about the Oak Creek Meadows, HOA, and Karen Smee. Find out where their money comes from, who's on the board, what shell corporation share hiding behind. I'll make a few quiet calls of my own. We're going to dig. We're going to find out just how deep this rot goes. Linda's smile turned predatory. Oh, this is going to be fun. I'll put on a pot of coffee. The quiet life was officially over. We were in a fight now, and it was time to gather our ammunition. Karen Smith had tried to steal my father's truck. I was going to take her entire crooked empire apart, piece by piece. The next few days, our quiet little ranch house transformed into a makeshift field office. The kitchen table, usually covered in seed catalogs and local newspapers, was now littered with laptops, legal pads, and sit-a-lot maps of the Oak Creek Meadows subdivision. We were a two-person task force, and we worked with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this sort of thing before. Linda was a research wizard. She had a knack for navigating the labyrinth of public records, corporate filings, and social media that made up a person's digital. While she dove into the internet, I worked the phones. I had a handful of old contacts at the bureau and other agencies, people I trusted, people who owed me favors. I called in a few of them, keeping my requests vague. I didn't want to bring the full weight of the FBI down on this yet. This was still personal. I just needed information. Hey Mark, I'd say, talking to an old friend in the white-collar crime division. Hypothetical for you. If an HOA was, say, creating shell corporations to handle its security and landscaping contracts, and the president of that HOA was also the sole owner after those corporations, what kind of trouble would she be in? The answers were always the same. A whole world of trouble. Wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, the kind of charges that get a prosecutor sat in. Linda, meanwhile, was hitting pay dirt. Trevor, you have to see this, she called from the kitchen table. One evening, I walked over and she pointed at her screen. She had pulled up the incorporation documents for Oak Creek Meadows Security LLC and Evergreen Community Landscaping. Both were registered to a P.O. box, and both were formed just 6 months after Karen Smith was elected HOA president. Guess who the registered agent is for both companies? Linda asked, her eyes. Let me guess, I said. Karen Smith. Close, she said, clicking another link. Her maiden name, Karen Holdridge. She's been paying herself with HOA dues, funneling the money through these fake companies. She's not just a bully, she's an embezzler. We kept digging. We found a pattern of liens filed against the homes of elderly residents, often for trivial violations. We found that theft fees were exorbitant and the legal fees paid to a law firm that also listed Karen Smith's husband as a partner, whereas this wasn't just a power trip over an old truck. This was a systematic campaign of fraud and intimidation. They were bleeding the residents dry, and they were using their fake security force to enforce their will. The more we uncovered, the angrier I got. Not the hot, reckless anger of a street fight, but the cold, focused anger of an investigator building a case. These people weren't just breaking rules. They were preying on the vulnerable. They were using the law as a weapon against the very people it was supposed to protect. I took all the information Linda gathered and started building a file just like I would for an official case. I cross-referenced names, dates, and bank transfers. I created a timeline of events, a chart of the corporate structure, and a list of potential witnesses among the other residents. By the end of the week, we had a mountain of evidence. We had proof that the entire HOA operation under Karen Smith was a criminal enterprise wrapped in the veneer of suburban respectability. We had her. The question was, what to do with it. We could go to the local police, but a complicated white-collar case might get bogged down in their system for months. We could go to the district attorney, but that was also a slow process. Or I could use my own authority. The fraud crossed state lines through the use of mail and internet banking, which made it a federal case. That put it squarely in my jurisdiction. So, what's the verdict? Linda asked, leaning back in her chair and stretching. Do we drop the hammer? I looked at the file I had built. It was thick, detailed, and undeniable. Not yet, I said. She thinks she's untouchable. She thinks she has all Before we bring the law down on her, I want to give her one more chance to show everyone exactly who she is. She escalated this by coming after my truck. Now it's my turn to escalate. Linda raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, I said with a slow smile, that her little Securita checkpoint at the end of the road is a public nuisance. And I think it's about time a concerned citizen did something about it. The investigation phase was over. It was time to set a trap. Karen's May, feeling the sting of her minion's failure, decided to double down. A few days later, a new feature appeared at the intersection of my private driveway and the public county road, a portablet check. It was nothing more than their white SUV parked sideways with a couple of orange cones and a folding sign that read HOA Security Checkpoint. All vehicles subject to inspection. It was laughably illegal, a blatant attempt to assert authority where they had none. They were hoping to intimidate residents, to create the illusion of power. They didn't count on me. I saw it as I was heading into town for supplies. Hosea was there, along with Zip. They were stopping cars, peering in windows, and generally making a nuisance of themselves. When they saw my old workhorse of a pickup truck approaching, Horse stepped into the middle of the road and held up his hand, a smug look on his face. He clearly thought my badge was Ablove, or that he was safe on what he considered his turf. I slowed down, but didn't stop. I pulled right up to him, my front bumper inches from his knees. He didn't flinch, but his eyes widened a little. I rolled down my window. "Morning, Hosea," I said cheerfully. "Nice day for impersonating a police officer. That's a felony in this state, by the way." "This is a private road," he grunted, trying to recover his swagger. "H.O. Booze." "This," I said, pointing to the asphalt beneath us, "is County Road 412. It's public property. You are illegally obstructing a public That's another crime. You're racking up quite, Alice. You should ask your boss if your company health plan covers legal fees." Zip, standing by the cones, looked. He was clearly the brains of the operation, which wasn't saying much. "Hosea, maybe we should just let him go." Hosea ignored him. "We have the right to protect our community. You have the right to stand on your own property." He corrected him gently. "The second you step onto this road, you're in the county's jurisdiction. Now, I'm going to ask you once, politely. Move your vehicle and get out of the road." He crossed his thick arms. "Make me." I sighed a long theatrical sigh. "Okay," I said. I put Thetrock in park, killed the engine, and got out. I walked around to the front of my truck and stood facing him. "You're creating a public safety hazard, Hosea. What if an ambulance or a fire truck needed to get through here?" "It's for security," he repeated, his voice starting to waver. The confidence was a thin shell and it was cracking. "Fine," I said. "Then you've left me no choice." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed 911. Jose's eyes went wide. "What are you doing?" "Hello, dispatch," I said into the phone, my voice loud and clear. My name is Trevor Daniels. I'd like to report a public nuisance and an illegal obstruction of a roadway on County Road 412. Yes, that's right. 2 men in fake security uniforms are stopping traffic. They appear to be armed, though I can't confirm the legality of their firearms. They're refusing to let vehicles pass. No, I'm not in any immediate danger, but they are becoming increasingly agitated. Hosea's face was a mask of panic. "Hang up that phone," he hissed. I ignored him. "Yes, I'll stay on the line. I'm a retired law enforcement officer. I can handle the situation until a unit arrives, thank you." I lowered the phone, but didn't hang up. I looked at Hosea and smiled. "A sheriff's deputy shall be here in about 10 minutes. I'm sure he'll be very interested in your authorization to block a county road. Maybe he can explain the law to you in terms you'll understand." They use small words and big handcuffs. Zip had already started picking up the cones. "Hosea, that's it. I'm done. This is crazy. We're going to get arrested." He threw the cones in the back of the SUV and got in the driver's side. "Get in the car, Hosea." Hosea stood there for another second, his tiny brain trying to find a way to win this. There was no way. He had been completely outmaneuvered. Defeated, he shot me a look of pure hatred, then turned and got into the passenger seat. The SUV sped away, leaving the folding sign behind. I walked over, folded it up, and tossed it into the back of me. I got back in my truck and drove into town. The escalation hadn't been with fists or weapons. It had been with knowledge and the simple application of the actual law. They were playing a make-believe game of cops and robbers, and I had just reminded them that the real cops were only a phone call away. But I knew this wouldn't Beatty end. Karen Smay was not the type to give up. She had been publicly humiliated through her proxies. Now she... His ear, my voice a whisper. "You just committed assault on a federal officer. That's a 10-year minimum. Do you want Totri for 20? He froze. The fight completely gone out of him. I pulled a pair of heavy-duty zip ties from my back pocket. I'd started carrying them everywhere and efficiently secured Hishon's behind his back. I stood up, pushing him forward onto the ground. I looked at Hosea. "You want to be next?" Hosshook his head frantically, taking a step back. I then turned my full attention to Karen's SM. Her face was spell. The Queen had just watched her knight get taken off the board by a pawn, and she didn't know what to do. "You," I said, my voice cold as ice, "are under arrest for conspiracy to commit." That was a stretch of my authority, but it didn't matter. The effect was what I wanted. "Panic, Jokund, arrest me," she shrieked. "You have no authority here." "I have all the authority I need," I said, pulling out my phone. I didn't call 911 this time. I called the main number for the FBI's San Antonio field office and put it on speaker. "San Antonio Dispatch." A voice answered instantly. "Agent Daniels, badge 7539, requesting immediate assistance at my home address. Officer in distress, suspecting custody for assault on a federal agent. Upgrade response to code 3. Copy, Agent Daniels. Units aerial ready rolling. ETA 2 minutes. I hung up and looked at Karen. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving her looking like a cracked porcelain doll. She looked at her hired muscle zip-tied in the dirt, then Athos, who was backing away toward the SUV like a frightened child. She had played her last card, and it was the worst possible move. The game was over. All that was left was the public humiliation, and it was coming. I could already hear the distant rising scream of sirens. The wail of sirens grew from a distant hum to a piercing scream in what felt like seconds. First to arrivers, a county sheriff's deputy, a young guy with a serious face who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He pulled his cruiser up the driveway, saw the man zip-tied on the ground and me standing calmly beside him, and immediately drew his weapon. "Everybody stay where you are," he commanded, taking cover behind his car door. "Sheriff's Department. Easy, son," I said, holding my hands up slowly, away from my body. "I'm the one Woe called." "Federal agent?" I slowly reached for my credentials and held them up. The man on the ground assaulted me. The other two were his accomplices. By now, the sound of the commotion, the yelling, the sirens had attracted an audience. My closest neighbors, the Garkas from the ranch to the south, and old Mr. Henderson from across the road were standing at their fence lines, watching the drama unfold. This was better than television. Linda was on Thepatch, still filming, capturing every delicious moment of Karen Smith's downfall. The deputy, looking uncertain, cautiously approached and took my credentials. He examined them, his eyes going from the badge to my face. "Okay," he said, lowering his weapon slightly. "What the heck is going on here?" Before I could answer, Karen Smith found her voice again. It was shrill, panicked. "He's lying. I'm the victim here. This man is a lunatic. He assaulted me and I am the president of the Oak Creek Meadows Homeowners Association." The deputy looked at her, then at them on the ground, then back at me. He was clearly confused. That's when the second set of sirens arrived. Two sleek dark sedans with government plates roared up the driveway and parked behind the deputy's car. 4 men in dark suits and sunglasses got out. They moved with the crisp, non-nonsense efficiency of federal agents. My guys had arrived. The agent in charge, a man I knew named Dave, walked straight over to me. He completely ignored everyone else. "Trevor," he said, shaking my hand. "Yeah, okay." "Never better, Dave," I said. "Thanks for coming so quick. This is our primary subject. Karen Smee. She's the head of a criminal enterprise masquerading as an HOA. The one on the ground is her muscle. The big fella over there is another one, and we have it all on video." Dave nodded, then turned to the local deputy. "Agent Daniels is with the Bureau. This is a federal crime scene now. We'll take it from here, but we'd appreciate your assistance with securing the suspects." The deputy's jaw was practically on the ground. He looked at me with a newfound respect. "Yes, sir," he mumbled. Karen Smith's face was a priceless picture of horror and disbelief. Her entire world was collapsing in on her right here on misty patch of land in front of my neighbors. "This is a misunderstanding," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I'm a respected member of the community. You can't do this." Dave turned to her, his expression unreadable behind hissing glasses. "Ma'am, we have evidence of wire fraud, mail fraud, extortion, and embezzlement, all orchestrated by you through the Oak Creek Meadows HOA, and you just conspired to commit assault on a federal officer. You have the right to remain silent." One of the other agents stepped forward with a pair of handcuffs. As the cold steel clicked around her wrists, Karen Smith let out an apathetic wail. All the power, all the authority she had built her identity around, evaporated in that single metallic sound. Hosea, who had been trying to blend in with the side of his SUV, was quickly put in cuffs as well. hadn't resist. The fight was long gone. The neighbors were murmuring now, pointing. The story would be all over county by lunchtime. The tyrannical HOA president, arrested by the FBI on the quiet rancher's property she had tried to bully. Linda walked down from the porch, her phone finally lowered. She came and stood beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "You think they'll add the pantsuit to the charges?" she whispered, a predatory smile playing on her lips. "Because that thing is definitely a crime against fashion." I squeezed her hand, a wave of relief washing over me. "They'll get her on everything," I said, watching as Thegents led a sobbing Karen Smith to one of the sedans. "It's over." The showdown hadn't been a shootout. It had been a quiet, systematic dismantling of a bully's empire, using the very laws she had twisted for her own gain. And it had all happened in the light of day for everyone to see. Justice, it turned out, sometimes wears a dusty pair of work boots. The legal hammer fell swift and hard. With the evidence Linda and I had smelled, plus the open and shut case of assaulting a federal agent, Karen Smith's little kingdom crumbled overnight. The U.S. Attorney's Office took the case, and they were thrilled. It was a prosecutor's dream. Clear-cut fraud, a mountain of evidence, and Aveline so ridiculously arrogant she had practically gift-wrapped the case for them. Her two goons, Hosea and the other guy, whose name turned out to be Mitch, sang like canaries. They cut deals, agreeing to testify against their former boss in exchange for lesser charges. They detailed the entire scheme. How Karen Smee had them intimidate residents, how she forged documents, how she bragged about the money she was skimming from the HOA dues. The story hit the local news, then the state news. HOA president arrested, an FBI sting was a headline people loved to read. The details of her fake security force, thigh legal checkpoints, and the campaign of harassment were laid bare. The residents of Oak Creek Meadows were shocked, then relieved. A special community meeting was called. With Karen Smith and her cronies gone, the real homeowners had a chance to take back their neighborhood. The bylaws were written. The phony contracts for security and landscaping were voided. The liens she had placed on peopleshims were thrown out. It turned out our little stand was the first domino to fall in a long line. People who had been too scared to speak up before were now coming forward with their own stories of Karen Smith's reign of terror. The district attorney's office opened its own investigation into her husband's law firm, which had been complicit in the whole scheme. The federal government seized her assets, the shiny Escalade, the bank accounts filled with stolen HOA funds, the beige house that was way too big for just two people. Everything she had built on a foundation of lies and intimidation was repossessed by the very system she thought she could manipulate. My role in it all was mostly paperwork. I had to give a formal statement, turn over all my video evidence, and testify before a grand jury. But for the most part, the system took over and did its job. Dave, the agent in charge, called me a few weeks later. "You know, Trevor," he said, "you could have just called us from the beginning." "I know," I said, "but where's the fun in that?" Besides, she had to learn her lesson the hard way. He laughed. "Well, she's about to learn it for the next 7 to 10 years, according to the prosecutor. You and your wife did a hell of a job building this case. If you ever get tired of cows, there's always a desk for you back here." "Thanks, Dave," I said, looking out my window at the rolling hills of my ranch. "But I think I'll stick with the cows. It's quieter out here." We hung up, and a deep sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't just the quiet of the countryside. It was the quiet of a finished job, a problem solved, a wrong made right. We had faced a threat, not with overwhelming force, but with patience, intelligence, and a firm belief in the law. We had let the villain hang herself with her own rope. The federal hammer hadn't just removed a corrupt HOA president. It had restored a community. It had given power back to the people who deserved it. And it had proven once again that a badge is only as powerful as the integrity of the person who carries it. Karen Smay had used her fake authority to enrich herself. I had used my real authority to protect my home and my neighbors. In the end, that was the only difference that mattered. The dust settled. The sirens were a distant memory. The news cycle moved on to the next scandal. And on our ranch, life returned to a quiet, peaceful rhythm. The only reminder of the whole affair was the 2 shallow ruts on the lawn where the tow truck had been. But even those were starting to fade, covered over by new grass. The Oak Creek Meadows HOA sent us a letter. It was on plain white paper this time, no fancy logo. It was a formal apology written by the newly elected board president, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Gable. She thanked us for what we had done and assured us that our property was, and always had, been exempt from their rules. She even invited us to their community barbecue. We politely declined, but we appreciated the gesture. The community was healing. Thiefer that Karen Smith had cultivated was gone, replaced by a sense of neighborly cooperation. People were talking to each other again. They were planting flowers instead of putting up security cameras. They had taken back their homes. One sunny Saturday afternoon, I was out by the oak tree, finally finishing the repair on that leaky hydraulic line on the tractor. The real work. The kind that leaves grease under your fingernails and a sense of accomplishment in your soul. My dad's old Ford sat nearby, silent and steadfast, its faded red paint glowing in the warm sunlight. It was more than just a truck now. It was a symbol of standing your ground, of refusing to be pushed around. Linda came out of the house carrying 2 tall glasses of iced tea. She handed one to me and leaned against the tractor tire, looking at the old truck. You know, she said, I think your dad would have been proud of you. He would have called me a fool for letting it get that far, I said with a chuckle. He would have handled it with a shotgun and some harsh language on day. One. Maybe, she said, taking a sip of her tea. But your way was better, more elegant, and definitely more satisfying to watch. We stood there for a long time, not saying anything, just enjoying the quiet, the lowing of the cattle, the buzz of insects, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the oak tree. This was what we had fought for. Not just the truck, not just Theland, but this feeling of absolute unshakable peace. This was home. Linda finished her tea and took my empty glass. Well, she said, heading back to the house. Dinner would be ready in Anhar. Don't be late. I watched her go, then turned back to my work. I picked up me wrench, ready to tighten the last bolt. The sun was warm on my back. The world was exactly as it should be. We had faced the monster. At the gate and won. I patted the warm hood of the Ford, listening to the sickers start their evening chorus. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I'd never run from one. We protected our peace the only way that matters, by refusing to yield an inch. Of it, the fence line was clear now, and God helps the next person who tries to cross.